Welcome to SchiZophia. I'm Calm, a fractured mind exploring philosophy, science, mythology, mysticism, psychology, and consciousness. Let's begin. Where is the center of the universe? It seems like a straightforward question, the kind that should have a straightforward answer. Coordinates, a location, something you could point to on a map if the map were large enough. It doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is stranger and more personally consequential than it might initially appear. Physics tells us the universe has no center. Not that we haven't found it yet, not that it's too far away to detect, but that there genuinely isn't one. Every point in the universe is equivalent to every other point. No location is special. No position is privileged, which means something that sounds paradoxical at first. If there's no center, then every observer is equally the center. You, looking out from wherever you are, occupy a position that is cosmologically equivalent to any other position in the observable universe. The universe looks the same in every direction, at every scale, from every point. That's not poetry, that's the cosmological principle, one of the foundational assumptions of modern physics. But here's what I want to sit with before we go further. If every observer is equally the center, what does that mean for how we understand consciousness, experience, and the structure of reality itself? What follows from taking that seriously? Not just as a fact about astronomy, but as a claim about the nature of existence. That's what this video is about, and the answer, I think, is stranger and more interesting than the question. Let's start with what physics actually establishes before we move into anything speculative. The cosmological principle has two components. The universe is homogeneous. Matter is distributed uniformly at the largest scales. No region is denser or more significant than any other. And the universe is isotropic. It looks the same in every direction from any point. These aren't philosophical claims, they're observational findings confirmed by the large-scale distribution of galaxies and the cosmic microwave background radiation. The faint afterglow of the early universe that reaches us equally from every direction. The direct implication is that there is no center and no edge. Most of us carry an intuitive picture of the Big Bang as an explosion, a point in space where everything began, expanding outward in all directions. That picture is wrong, and the cosmological principle is why. The Big Bang wasn't an explosion in space. It was an expansion of space itself, happening everywhere simultaneously. There is no location you could travel to and say, "It started here." The beginning wasn't a place. A useful analogy is the surface of an inflating balloon. Draw dots on it. Those are galaxies. As the balloon inflates, every dot moves away from every other dot. No dot is the center of the expansion. The expansion is happening in the surface itself, not from any particular point on it. Our universe is the three-dimensional analog of that surface. Curved, boundless, centerless. Now here's where this stops being just astronomy. The cosmological principle tells us that no position in the universe is objectively privileged, which means the sense any observer has of being at the center of their observable universe, seeing everything arranged around them in every direction, isn't an illusion or an ego. It's geometrically accurate. Every observer genuinely is at the center of their own observable universe, because the observable universe is defined by what's reachable from that position. Every center is equally valid. No center is more real than any other. That's the established science. What I want to build on top of it, carefully and honestly, is a question the cosmological principle raises but doesn't answer. If no position is privileged, if every observer is equally a center, what does that tell us about the nature of observation itself? About consciousness, about experience, about what it means to be a loop that perceives rather than just a point that exists. That's where we're going next. Now we move into territory that's genuinely speculative. I want to be clear about that before we go further. What follows isn't established physics. It's a philosophical framework that takes certain ideas from physics seriously and extends them further than the physics itself warrants. Worth knowing that going in. With that said, let's talk about loops. The standard picture of causation is linear. The past determines the present determines the future. Time flows in one direction and causes travel with it. This picture is so deeply embedded in how we think that it feels less like an assumption and more like an obvious fact. But it is an assumption, and certain interpretations of quantum mechanics have been quietly uncomfortable with it for decades. In quantum mechanics, measurement outcomes aren't pre-existing facts waiting to be discovered. They're generated at the moment of interaction. Before measurement, a particle doesn't have a definite position or a definite spin. It exists in superposition, a range of possible states. The measurement doesn't reveal which state it was in. It produces the state. This raises a genuinely strange possibility that some physicists take seriously. Retrocausality, not in the science fiction sense of signals traveling backward through time. Something more subtle. Instead of asking what initial conditions determine future outcomes, ask what global structure is consistent with both initial and final conditions simultaneously. The system satisfies constraints from both ends at once, like a mathematical equation that has to balance on both sides rather than a sequence that unfolds from left to right. Now, what shape is a structure like that? The honest answer is a torus. Not a simple circle which just returns to where it started without transformation. A torus, the shape of a donut, is a loop that loops around itself in two directions simultaneously. It has an interior and an exterior. It curves back on itself while maintaining a consistent overall form. And crucially, information can travel across its surface in multiple directions at once, with no single privileged starting point. This is a better geometric model for what we're describing than a simple loop. A closed temporal structure isn't just a circle of causation. It's a self-referential form that folds back on itself in more than one dimension. The future and past don't just connect end to end. They wrap around each other, mutually constituting the whole structure from multiple directions simultaneously. Think of it this way. A torus has no privileged point, which connects directly back to the cosmological principle we established in Act 1. Every point on the surface of a torus is geometrically equivalent to every other point. No center, no edge, no beginning or end. Just continuous self-referential structure. And if the universe at the most fundamental level is structured as interacting tori rather than as particles following linear causal chains, several things follow worth sitting with carefully. The universe doesn't need an external first cause. The torus grounds itself. Its coherence is its own justification. What we call measurement in quantum mechanics is precisely an intersection event between these structures, where the outcome emerges at the boundary rather than being pre-contained in either. And subjectivity, the interior quality of experience, isn't a late addition to an otherwise objective universe. It may be present wherever genuine self-referential toroidal structure exists. I want to hold that last point carefully. I'm not claiming electrons are conscious. I'm claiming the self-referential structure that makes consciousness possible at the human scale may be present in more primitive form at scales we don't usually think of as experiential. That's a significant speculative step. What I'm more confident about is this. The torus framework gives us a concrete geometric model for how future and past can mutually constitute each other without paradox, how every point can be simultaneously a center, and how self-reference can be built into the basic structure of reality rather than emerging accidentally from it. Let's bring this back to something immediate. You are right now at the center of your observable universe, not metaphorically, geometrically. Everything you can observe is arranged around your position, light reaching you from every direction, the entire observable cosmos organized relative to where you stand. We established this in Act 1 as a consequence of the cosmological principle. But I want to sit with what it actually means, rather than just state it and move on. The classical intuition, so going back to Aristotle, was that some positions are genuinely more central than others. Earth at the center of the cosmos because that's where heavy things naturally belong. Then the sun at the center. Then our galaxy. Each demotion felt like a loss. Humanity pushed further from significance with every scientific advance. But the cosmological principle doesn't just demote Earth from the center. It dissolves the concept of a privileged center entirely. And that's a different move with different implications. You're not insignificant because you're far from the center. You're significant because every position is equally central, including yours. Now connect this to the torus structure from Act 2. A torus has no privileged point. Every point on its surface has the same geometric relationship to the whole. If the fundamental structures of reality are toroidal, self-referential loops where no point is privileged, then the observer as center principle isn't just a cosmological curiosity. It's a statement about the basic ontology of self-referential systems. Every loop is a center because that's what loops are. A loop has no outside point from which it could be demoted to the periphery. It folds back on itself completely, which means its interior perspective is always necessarily central to its own structure. This is where the cosmological and the personal genuinely converge rather than just analogize each other. The reason you experience yourself as the center of your perceptual world isn't a cognitive bias to be corrected. It's an accurate reflection of your structural position as a self-referential loop in a universe of self-referential loops. Your perspective isn't privileged over others, but it is genuinely central to itself. That has a quiet but significant implication for how we understand consciousness. The felt sense of being a subject, of having an inside, of being the point from which experience radiates outward, isn't an illusion generated by a brain that hasn't understood its own insignificance. It's the accurate interior report of what it is to be a loop. Self-reference feels like something from the inside because that's what self-reference is. A structure that has an inside. I want to be careful here not to overclaim. This doesn't prove that consciousness is fundamental or that experience is cosmologically significant in some grand sense. What it does is remove a specific reason to think consciousness is anomalous. The intuition that a centerless universe has no room for genuine subjectivity. It does. Every loop is a center. Every self-referential structure has an interior. The universe being centerless doesn't make your experience of being a center false. It makes it one instance of a universal structural feature. Everything we've established so far, the centerless universe, the toroidal loop structure, the observer as genuine center, would be philosophically interesting but limited in scope if it only applied to one level of reality. What I want to propose now is that the same structure repeats across scales. And I want to be honest up front, this is the most speculative claim in this video. Scale invariance is a real mathematical concept. Certain structures look the same regardless of the scale at which you examine them. Fractals are the most familiar example. Zoom into a coastline and the same jagged complexity appears at every level of magnification. The organizing principle doesn't belong to any particular scale. It generates coherent structure at all scales simultaneously. The claim I'm making, carefully as a hypothesis rather than established fact, is that the toroidal loop structure we've been describing may be scale invariant in this sense. The same self-referential, centerless, mutually constituting dynamic appearing at the quantum level, the human level, and the cosmic level. Let's look at what that actually means at each scale rather than just asserting it. At the quantum level, we've already established the case. Particles as excitations of fields rather than independent objects. Measurement outcomes generated at intersection boundaries rather than pre-existing in either system. Retrocausality as global constraint rather than linear determination. The toroidal structure fits here because quantum systems are genuinely self-referential in the way we've described. Their states aren't independent of the observations that produce them. At the human level, the correspondence is worth examining carefully rather than just assuming. Two people in genuine encounter don't simply exchange pre-formed information. Something emerges at the boundary of that interaction that neither person contained beforehand. A conversation that changes how you think, a relationship that reorganizes your priorities. A story that restructures how you understand your own life. These aren't just inputs processed by a fixed system. They're intersection events that alter the loop itself. The outcome isn't pre-contained in either person. It's generated at the boundary the way quantum measurement outcomes are generated at the intersection of fields. Is this the same structure as quantum field interaction? I want to be honest. I don't know. The correspondence is real and worth taking seriously. Whether it reflects a genuine underlying unity or a suggestive analogy is a question I can't answer definitively. What I can say is that treating it as mere metaphor seems like it dismisses something too quickly, and treating it as proven seems like it claims too much. At the cosmic level, the case is more speculative still. The large-scale structure of the universe, galaxy filaments, cosmic voids, the web-like distribution of matter, does exhibit self-similarity across scales. The same organizational patterns appearing at different levels of cosmic structure. Whether this reflects genuine toroidal loop dynamics at the cosmological scale or simply the statistical behavior of matter under gravity is an open question. What I find most interesting about the scale invariance hypothesis isn't any particular level. It's what it implies about the relationship between levels. If the same structure genuinely repeats from quantum to human to cosmic scales, then human experience isn't an anomaly requiring special explanation in an otherwise mechanical universe. It's one instance of a universal organizational principle. The most complex and self-aware instance we have direct access to, but not a different kind of thing from what's happening at other scales. That's worth sitting with, honestly. Not as a proven conclusion, but as a genuine possibility that changes what questions seem worth asking. If scale invariance holds, studying human consciousness isn't just studying one particular biological phenomenon. It's studying the loop structure from the inside. The only scale at which the interior of a loop is directly accessible rather than inferred from outside. Which is exactly where we're headed in this series. Let me bring this back to the question we started with. Where is the center of the universe? The honest answer is everywhere and nowhere. Every point equally central, no point privileged. Which sounds like a paradox until you sit with it long enough to see that it's actually a precise geometric description of a specific kind of structure. A structure without outside or edge, folding back on itself completely, every part equally related to the whole. We've covered a lot of ground in this video. The cosmological principle as established science, closed temporal loops and toroidal geometry as a speculative but serious ontological framework. The observer as genuine center, not as consolation but as structural consequence. Scale invariance as a hypothesis worth taking seriously without over-claiming. I want to be honest about what we've established and what we haven't. The cosmological principle is solid. The toroidal loop framework is speculative but philosophically coherent. The scale invariance claim is the most uncertain of the three. Genuinely interesting, genuinely unproven. What I think holds regardless of how the speculative parts resolve is this. The universe being centerless doesn't make your experience of being a center false or insignificant. It makes it one instance of something that may be universal. A self-referential structure with a genuine interior, looking out from its own position at a cosmos that looks the same from every other position too. You are not at the edge of something that has a real center somewhere else. You are one loop in a universe of loops, each one equally central, each one folding back on itself, each one generating its interior perspective from the same structural necessity that generates yours. That's where this series begins. Everything else builds from here. And that's where we'll rest for today. Thank you for spending this time here. Genuinely. This channel is my way of building something real, on my own terms. If something here resonated with you, if it made you think or see something differently, pass it on. Share it, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.